Hi, my name is Michael O'Neill, but most folks just call me Irish. I'm a senior infrastructure software engineer at Boomtown, and I'm here to talk to you about building the confidence to make big changes to your infrastructure during normal business hours instead of in the middle of the night. You can find me on LinkedIn if you're into that sort of thing, or email me directly if you're not. But I will apologize in advance. I don't have a great personal SLA on response times. Let's set the scene a little bit with the types of things that I have to deal with and worry about. I imagine a lot of you will have similar concerns, experiences, expectations, etc. Boomtown is a real estate software company with a mission of making real estate agents successful. Like a lot of other software companies, we make a ton of things, but we have a few products that are critically important and failures are highly visible. Our customer relationship management tool is how our clients, realtors, manage communications with their clients, prospective home buyers or sellers we call consumers, and is what they spend a lot of their daily office time using. As such, our peak usage is somewhere between 9 a.m. Eastern Time and 5 p.m. Hawaii Aleutian Time. In other words, a 14-hour block of the day encompassing any and all hours I might feel like working. Our consumer sites are where people search for homes to buy or set themselves up to sell their current home. While these users aren't directly our clients, any problems they have still filter up to us because they make our clients unhappy. These sites follow a similarly shaped usage curve, but they never really stop getting traffic. If we can never go offline, how are we supposed to do disruptive work like upgrading servers or their various subsystems? Easy. Technology professionals created maintenance windows for just this sort of thing. What makes a good maintenance window? Just pick a time of day when all your users are offline and all of your technical operations employees are online. Which is to say, you should pick a time that is outside of business hours, meal times, weekends, sleeping hours, and leisure hours. Frankly, there's no such thing as a good maintenance window. Scheduled downtime is still downtime. We have to balance client preferences and impact against tech op preferences. But because our clients are giving the company money and the company is paying the tech ops folks to be on call, deciding who gets the short end of that stick is a pretty easy business decision. Our maintenance window is from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. Eastern Time. That's no fun, but what other options do we have? Enter high availability. That's what HAProxy is for, right? Drain a host, put it in maintenance mode, make your changes, set it as available again. Thanks for coming to my talk. I'm glad I could solve every problem you'll ever encounter with a single sentence. Okay, fine. What if I don't know how the maintenance I just performed will impact my production environment? What if my QA or staging environments are just different enough that I'm still concerned that something will go wrong? What if I'm confident, but upper management is still worried about me making changes to production in the middle of the day? What if HAProxy itself is the thing I have to do maintenance on? Well, there are a lot of CI/CD solutions out there. The folks at HAProxy even have a GitLab demo you can check out, and I encourage you to do so. That helps make sure your HAProxy configuration is valid, but it doesn't necessarily address the other concerns from the last slide. Nobody from outside your organization can address every concern you have within your organization, not even me, but I'll try. So let's look at a couple of real-life scenarios that allowed me to stop worrying about our maintenance window and love the midday deploy. Our consumer sites run on WordPress. WordPress moved from PHP 5 to PHP 7, and that meant we needed to upgrade both WordPress and the PHP runtime, and make sure that the rest of our code worked not just in the development environment, but across all our other environments. Our version of CentOS didn't have an official PHP 7 package, and doing an OS upgrade on a production machine is rarely my first choice. I figured we could just leave our existing hosts in place and stand up a new one to add to our backend once it was ready. A little bit of Terraform and a few updated Ansible playbooks later, and we had a fresh new CentOS system with official PHP 7 packages. A few more additions to the deployment pipeline, and we're delivering our software to a brand new but completely unused host. We added a new HAProxy backend for our QA environment that only ran our PHP 7 host and did the testing there. But we still needed our PHP 5 host and QA to match our production environment. The engineering team was pretty confident that things would work, but still felt a lot of pressure to get it right when making changes to a highly visible part of the system with tens of millions of requests per day. We could always add it to the backend during our maintenance window, but then only some subset of sessions would be reaching the new host, and issues could be intermittent or difficult to track. We needed something that would make upper management confident enough to let us flip the switch, as it were. The easiest way I've found to make stakeholders comfortable is to show them something is working before going public with it. To that end, we added a new PHP 7 host to the backend with a weight of 0, meaning it would not yet receive any traffic. We added another backend that only had a PHP 7 host in it, and we routed any and all internal traffic to that backend. We also left an ACL that looked for a custom header as an easy way to let our office request the PHP 5 hosts on demand in case of emergency. But we now had our entire staff using the PHP 7 version of the sites, so if there were any problems, someone was bound to run into the bug and file it before the consumer started using it. After we built some confidence internally, we started adjusting the weight of the PHP 7 host in our production backend up from 0. This didn't need to be done during our maintenance window because we weren't making any big changes. We just let the new host serve a few percent of traffic and increased it every day until it was just a normal part of the backend. Every day we didn't hear about any issues made our leadership team more comfortable with the idea of moving everything over. Thanks to Terraform and Ansible, standing up a new PHP 7 host was a matter of a few minutes worth of work and adding one more host to the deployment pipeline. Because we already knew the hosts worked by virtue of being identical to the one we'd been running for a week already, they could be added to the backend without having to play the same games with their weight. They started serving traffic without issue, and I had single-handedly doubled my team's infrastructure costs. But only for a little bit. With the new hosts working well, we could start powering down the old PHP 5 hosts. The great thing about this was that nobody was ever really stressed out about a big change because there weren't any. We were able to deliver a bunch of small changes in a way that was low risk. This also meant that the completion of the PHP 5 to PHP 7 migration, a pretty major project for us, happened a little before lunchtime on an uneventful day in the middle of the week. It was remarkably unremarkable. Let's take a quick look at some configuration snippets to make this all a little more concrete. Some names and IPs have been changed to protect the innocent, but facsimiles of the additions we made are highlighted in dark teal. We added new ACLs for PHP 5 and PHP 7 to our front end. If you set a custom XPHP header to the version you wanted, we direct your request there. This is the escape hatch I mentioned before and allowed the developers to check things in either version on demand or to help other internal users switch back to PHP 5 if required. Otherwise, users in our office were directed to the PHP 7 backend and everyone else was sent to the normal production backend. We added the new host to our production backend with a weight of 0 to make sure it was showing up properly, passing health checks, and was ready to go once we enabled it. We added a completely new backend that had only PHP 7 hosts in it for the aforementioned developers and internal users. Every morning, when I started my day, I'd bump the weight on the new host up a few more percentage points if we didn't have any incidents the day before. If it helps, you can think of it like the world's slowest blue-green deployment, as we drain our old hosts and bring up the new host over the course of a week. By the end, we had removed the ACLs, removed the separate backend, and moved our 0 weight directives to the old hosts. This still gave us a quick way to add them back into the mix if anything came up, but they were effectively retired. Once everyone was happy and we had taken the position that any newly occurring issues were things that would just need to be addressed on the PHP 7 hosts, we removed the old host from the configuration and completely decommissioned them for good. Now, what if HAProxy itself is a thing you have to do maintenance on? Again, HAProxy has some documentation and examples on how to perform an in-place upgrade and how to fail over to another host in your cluster. But how do you make sure that the upgraded host is working properly before switching back? Most of our software is, in one way or another, behind HAProxy. We tend to stick to the long-term support releases of HAProxy Enterprise Edition, which also means that we don't do big upgrades on our HAProxy hosts very often. In fact, when we upgraded from HAPI 1.8 to HAPI 2.2, everyone who had been involved in the upgrade to HAPI 1.8 had moved on to new jobs. So we didn't have any real in-house experience with this particular process. I have a great team, though. We solve complicated problems all day, every day. Combined with documentation and the whole support staff, this is not some impossible task. Still, this is such a critical piece of infrastructure that messing with it in the middle of the day understandably leads to anxiety, either from us or our boss's boss. How can we do internal testing for our HAProxy cluster and confirm that our configuration is still working? The turns out, this was even simpler than the PHP 7 upgrade. Because the best QA environment mirrors its production environment, we deployed some new HAProxy instances to QA and installed our production configurations on them. While the outside world has no access to these hosts, my team can still reach them over the VPN. So we adjusted our local host files so that a few of our services would resolve to our QA HAProxy instances. The only thing we were really concerned with testing here was that the configuration files still worked because of some option changes between major versions. So long as HAProxy was returning the correct sites and still doing SSL termination, we were in pretty good shape. We didn't rope in the entire company this time, but a few minutes of time from the TechOps resource on each sprint team made quick work of confirming that all requests were routed as expected. With that done, we had the confidence and the demonstrated results to perform our upgrades in production environment. So we did. A critical piece of infrastructure upgraded in the middle of the day with zero downtime and zero anxiety. Okay, great. It worked for Boomtown, but what about everybody else? Luckily, these processes are pretty generic and can be repeated in almost exactly the same way in your own organizations. Somebody listening right now is going to need to upgrade from PHP 7 to PHP 8 in the not-too-distant future. I dare say even more of you will need to upgrade to a newer version of HAProxy eventually. So please, use these processes directly, or if you have a process that's even better, hit me up later and tell me about it. These are just the ideas I came up with to solve the deeper, less technical problem of working after hours. While we probably all have some shared experiences and technical problems we've had to solve that everyone else in our line of work has also had to solve, I think these non-technical problems are perhaps even more universal. The unfortunate part is that we might all have very unique technical challenges to solve these very universal non-technical problems. So with the exception of these few examples, it's difficult to offer you any direct advice. But if you'll allow me to be vague, we can skip the pop psychology lesson here, but I don't think I'll get a lot of pushback on these two statements. 1, we tend to be more comfortable making small changes than big changes. And 2, we don't always have a great intuition about determining whether a change is actually big or small. For example, we may think of changing a single value in a configuration file as a small change, but if that value means that we take a different branch somewhere down the line in our execution path, it's actually a big change. We may think of rewriting an algorithm in a function as a big change, but if it maintains the same interface and returns the same results, it's actually a small change. Of course, I get to pick contrived examples to prove my point, but this should help illustrate the disconnect between the differences in the size of a change set, the size of a change, the impact it has, and our ability to intuit these things. I assume most people willing to sit through this presentation have a story about a change that seemed small and had a huge impact, or vice versa. So again, what should you do to solve your particular technical challenge? Firstly, I encourage you to think big. Take the 60,000-foot view, or whatever altitude is sufficient for you to not get bogged down in the details. In very broad terms, what's the thing you really need to change, test, or verify? Does this configuration work? How does this new server perform? Then, we can borrow a bit from test-driven development strategies and identify what constitutes a successful test. Start working towards that. Is it possible to run that test in isolation? How much confidence does a successful test build? Ideally, you want to walk away from this bit of questioning and planning with something you could explain to non-technical people. Then, you need to start thinking small. Get down in the weeds and look for the smallest set of behavioral changes you can make to run your test. New servers responding to a subset of users, moving your SSL termination point, using an ACL to redirect a particular type of request that you'll be making as part of the test, that type of thing. Finally, are there meaningful technical differences between what you've tested and what would go into production? This is the time to be paranoid and pick things apart, because there's no real pressure. You can do this calmly and thoroughly before you proceed. Once you've raised and resolved every objection to your plan, run it by your leadership team. Explain how this type of thing helps prepare you for emergencies as well. All of this builds on itself. Once you start doing some minor midday infrastructure maintenance without issue, you'll gain the confidence to do more major work. Let me reiterate, I am not advising that you get rid of your QA environment or that you shouldn't strive for that bright, shining future where you have a staging environment that perfectly mimics your production environment, complete with load simulation and automated tests and sign-off from every stakeholder. Sure, I'm not the only person here who has performance goals around application and infrastructure uptime. And I'm not here to give you exciting new ways to bomb your metrics and performance reviews. I'm just reminding you that we can test and deploy things in a way that makes them less nerve-wracking and makes our schedules more pleasant. Everybody who works in ops has a couple of crazy stories. Big firefights caused by strange bugs, intrusion attempts, hardware failures, or a dozen other things. We do our best to frame them heroically and sound cool about how well we perform under pressure, but I'd rather not acquire too many more of these stories. I want the excitement of my job to come from the pure joy of solving a difficult technical problem, not from overcoming an adversarial actor on the other side of the world, not from managing the fallout of something that went wrong, and certainly not from the relief that the thing I screwed up was at 3 a.m., so it's just not that big a deal. I want to have a plan for the day, execute that plan during my normal working hours, and sign off. Sometimes, boring is good. So I encourage you all to think about how we can use the technologies at our disposal to make the parts of our job that feel risky more boring, to foster a sense of fearlessness on your teams, not because you're reckless, but because you've already addressed the risks. In this 24/7 world, do what you can to make sure that you and your teams have some downtime and that your servers don't. Here's my contact information again in case you feel compelled to tell me how great or terrible I am. Thank you for your attention.
And here we have Michael joining us live. I really enjoyed that talk, and I liked how you got somewhat philosophical at the end as well. And it's Irish, right?
Yes, please.
Great. So as a reminder to everyone tuning in, you can submit questions in the chat. You can also submit them on Twitter using the hashtag HAProxyConf. All right, so we'll get right into some questions. Irish, you refer to yourself as someone to whom problem solving comes quite naturally. Do you have any sort of advice for approaching problems in a calm and collected way?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's great when solutions can come to you intuitively and you can just knock out a problem right away. Relying on that in a pinch can cause a lot of unnecessary anxiety when it doesn't work. So getting in the habit of approaching every problem in a systematic way gives you kind of a process to follow and enough structure to keep you calm and focused, no matter how the issue progresses, while still providing opportunities for your intuition to sprint to the finish line. I hate to answer a question by telling you to look it up yourself, but systematic approaches to problem solving could have their own conference. So spend some time with your favorite search engine and the query systematic approach to problem solving. Pick something that works for you and your team, and any one of them should help you to very rarely feel stuck.
Yeah, and of course, thinking of it as a system and a process allows it to be replicable, right?
Yeah.
All right, another question we have. You explained how your team dog foods changes before releasing them live to your customers. Do you have any tips for teams who want to start doing this? Do you block out a certain day to do it, or is it something that's continuous?
I would say it's a little bit of both. We try to do it in a pretty continuous way, as needed. But you should definitely let everyone know what you're doing and when. A few days worth of notice really helps everyone feel more comfortable. Ideally, you want to be able to demonstrate that things work in an environment that's isolated from your end users, but also mirrors what they'll be using as closely as possible. So if you can spare a server from your production cluster and use that as a canary, it drastically improves your worst case scenario.
So the big question, have you truly been able to get rid of maintenance windows?
Not totally, but I will admit I recently had to do some work at 2 a.m. I hate that it happened before this talk, especially, but it does still happen. But it's the first time in months, maybe bordering on a year, that I had to do things after hours.
Yeah, and I think that alone is a testament to that systematic approach that you've talked about and what you've been able to implement. Of course, as we all know, things come up, it happens, right?
Yep.
Great. So thank you so much for joining us, for helping us really understand high availability better and how your team has applied that within your environment and in this idea of being able to eliminate maintenance windows. Are there any last tips you want to leave with the audience? Any parting thoughts?
Yeah, document and automate as much as you can. Some people have what I would consider to be a counterproductive view of job security, where they think that the best way to remain employed is to be the only person that knows a particular system or process, while I think exactly the opposite is true. One of the core values at Boomtown actually is to seek and share knowledge. So documenting systems and processes so that other people can do the things that you do actually makes you significantly more valuable to your company and makes you really attractive to other potential employers in case they don't see that. I really like where I am now, but the best job security comes from having options and is the kind of stuff that makes sure you'll always have them. The advantages of automation are probably pretty well understood by this crowd, but just make the effort to actually build it out,
Seek and share knowledge. That's a really nice takeaway and closing thought for this conference in particular. So Irish, thank you so much for joining us. Really enjoyed the talk, and thank you so much for joining for the live Q&A as well. Hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Take care.